How one illegal Allied project fooled the entire German radar network. Night of December 2nd, 1943. Normandy coast, 3:47 a.m. Radar officer Oberleutnant Klaus Weber watches the phosphorescent screen flickering ghost green in the darkness of the German bunker. His eyes burn after 6 uninterrupted hours of surveillance. Static crackles in his headphones. The sea crashes against the cliffs 200 meters away, a rhythmic and intoxicating sound that cradles the cold night of the English Channel. So, 1 point, then another one, and another. Weber leans forward. The screen explodes in constellations, dozens, hundreds, thousands of luminous points advancing from the west like a swarm of electronic wasps. His heart races. His hands tremble as he reaches for the campaign phone. Oberst, we have a massive formation. Sector 7-3. Low altitude. Speed, 160 kilometers per hour. There are hundreds of them. On the other end of the line, the coastal sector commander responds with the coldness of someone who has witnessed 1,000 false alarms. Impossible. The British don't have that capability. Check your equipment. Weber looks at the screen again. The dots advance, coordinated, relentless. An air armada approaching the French coast with the inevitability of a rising tide. Sirens begin to howl along the Atlantic wall. Anti-aircraft batteries swing their barrels toward the sky. Searchlights sweep through the low clouds like fingers of God searching for demons. Messerschmitt Bf-109 fighters take off from Abbeville, their Daimler-Benz engines tearing through the night with 12 cylinders of Germanic fury. They are searching, and they find nothing. Just empty sky, silent clouds, an indifferent sea. Weber looks at the screen again. The dots have disappeared. Like ghosts dissolved by the light of day that has not yet arrived. His superior reprimands him over the radio. Equipment malfunction, nervousness, fatigue. A young officer frightened by electronic shadows. He can't see what's really happening 10,000 feet above his head. 24 Lancaster bombers flying in perfect formation, each carrying not bombs, but millions of strips of aluminum foil cut with scientific precision, each piece measuring 27 centimeters long by 2 centimeters wide, falling from the open belly of the aircraft like metallic snow, floating in the wind, spinning, reflecting radar waves into millions of false echoes. The real attack, 200 bombers loaded to their structural limits with explosives, is happening 150 kilometers to the south, flying below the radar ceiling, invisible, protected by the curtain of electronic confusion. What the Germans didn't know was that on that day, they were witnessing the birth of a new form of warfare, a war where reality could be bent, where entire armies could be conjured out of thin air, and where truth would become the first casualty, not of propaganda, but of applied physics. 18 months earlier, March 1942. Telecommunications Research Establishment, Swanage, Dorset. Dr. Joan Struthers looks at the stack of aluminum foil on the laboratory bench as if she were examining medieval gold. In her eyes, each sheet is not just metal. It is physical possibility transformed into matter. The air war over Europe has turned into a mathematical massacre. Royal Air Force bombers are being shot down at a rate of 5% per mission. Not by the Luftwaffe. German fighters are lethal, but predictable. The real killer is invisible. The German Freya and Würzburg radar system, a detection network that transforms the European sky into a hunting ground illuminated by electromagnetic waves. Each British bomber carries 10 men. 5% losses means that in 20 missions, mathematically, you are dead. The RAF is bleeding crews faster than it can train them. 19-year-olds disappear into the darkness over Germany, turned into statistics before they even complete their 20th mission. Churchill is furious. Portal is desperate. And in a British coastal laboratory, a scientist is cutting aluminum foil into strips. The theory is absurdly simple. Radar waves, electromagnetic radiation at a frequency of 560 megahertz, reflect off metallic objects. A Lancaster bomber has a wingspan of 20 meters. It returns a strong echo. But what if you could create 1,000 false echoes? What if you could flood the sky with phantom targets, each indistinguishable from a real bomber? The problem is physics. To efficiently reflect a radar wave with a wavelength of 53 centimeters, you need a reflector with a half wavelength of 26.5 centimeters. Aluminum foil, a cheap, lightweight material available in industrial quantities ever since Henry Ford started packaging chocolate. Cut it into 27-centimeter strips. Release it from the sky. Let physics do the rest. Simple in theory, impossible in practice. The first problem? Production. You need millions of strips. Each bomber would need to carry hundreds of thousands. The British industry, already overburdened producing Spitfires and Lancasters, Churchill tanks, and 8-pound ammunition, would now have to cut aluminum foil. The second problem? Distribution. How do you release millions of strips from a bomber traveling at 500 kilometers per hour without them clumping together, clogging the hatches, flying back, and damaging the aircraft's own control surfaces? The third problem, the enemy. What if the Germans copy it? What if this weapon is turned against the RAF? What if the British skies are filled with the same electronic ghosts, blinding the home chain radar network that is the only line of defense against German bombers? For 6 months, the project is buried in security bureaucracy. Classification: most secret. Code name: window. Window, because that's what it promised. A window through the world's most sophisticated electronic defense. September 1942. Experimental tests over the Irish Sea. A modified Wellington bomber flies in circles, while technicians push strips of radar through the rear gunner's hatch. On the shore, at a mobile radar station, operators watch in astonishment as a single bomber multiplies on the screen like a cancerous cell dividing. 1 bomber becomes 10, 10 becomes 50, 50 becomes an impossible armada. Doctor. Robert Cockburn, the project leader, notes in the official report, the effect on radar screens was equivalent to an electronic snowstorm. Individual aircraft tracking, impossible. Distinguishing between real and false targets, impossible. Radar-based defense was, for all practical purposes, blinded. But Churchill still hesitates. What if the Germans use it against London? The capital was already bombed for 8 months in 1940. The scars still bleed. The memory still burns. He cannot take the risk. So, Window waits, and while he waits, men die. 5% per mission, 20 missions, and you're a statistic. The aluminum foil continues to be cut, packaged in bundles of 2,000 strips, stored in secret hangars. No one imagined that this apparent failure, a weapon banned for fear of retaliation, carried the seeds not only of victory, but of a complete reinvention of the very nature of aerial combat. Night of July 24, 25, 1943. Binbrook Air Base, Lincolnshire. Flight Sergeant Martin Middlebrook carries the window beams into the Lancaster G. George with an expression somewhere between skepticism and exhaustion. Each beam weighs almost a kilogram. His bomber is carrying 2,000 kilograms of aluminum foil, the equivalent weight of a high-capacity blockbuster bomb that could demolish an entire city block in Hamburg. Instead, they're carrying confetti. "Let's destroy the Germans with birthday party decorations," murmurs the rear gunner, too young to understand and too old to question. The briefing was surreal. The wing commander explained that every damn minute of flight over enemy territory, they had to push a bundle of strips through the leaflet launch hatch. 1,000 strips per minute. 60,000 strips per hour. Millions of strips floating over Germany like metallic cherry petals. "The Germans won't know where we are," the commander said with a conviction that seemed more like hope than certainty. Middlebrook looks at the cargo. 2,000 kilos of aluminum foil. 2,000 kilos that could have been incendiary bombs. 2,000 kilos that could have set factories ablaze, destroyed arsenals, crippled Nazi war potential. Instead, paper. Operation Gomorrah. The destruction of Hamburg. "791 bombers, the largest air raid ever mounted up to that point in human history. Lancasters, Halifaxes, Stirlings, and Wellingtons loaded to their structural limits, 12,000 tons of bombs, and millions of strips of aluminum foil." 10:57 p.m. The first aircraft crossed the German coast near Cuxhaven. Floodgates open. Gloved hands push bundles of air into the night. The wind rips them away, scatters them, spreads them like dandelion seeds in a storm. Not only that, but at the radar stations scattered along the North Sea coast, the confusion is instantaneous and total. Freya. Station 12 reports 200 aircraft. Würzburg, Station 7 report a mill. Freya. Station 4 reports 3,000. The numbers don't make sense. Controllers shout into field phones. Bf-110 night fighter jets take off, their Liechtenstein radars searching for targets in the darkness. And they find static. Their cathode ray tubes explode in thousands of false echoes. It's like trying to find a single specific star in the Milky Way. General Major Joseph Kamhuber, commander of the German Night Air Defense, watches helplessly as his 5-year-old defense system, the Kamhuber Line, an electronic radar wall guiding night fighters in geometrically perfect intercept zones, collapses into chaos. Their fighter jets are flying blind. Their anti-aircraft batteries are firing at ghosts. And the actual bombers, 791, each carrying 7 tons of death, are passing through the electronic storm like wolves through fog. Hamburg is burning. The first bombs fall at 0.57. Pathfinder markers transform the city center into an artificial day with green and red phosphorus. Then come the high-capacity explosives, destroying roofs, shattering windows, exposing interiors. Then the incendiary bombs, hundreds of thousands, small magnesium bombs the size of soup cans, each burning at 3,000 degrees Celsius. Hamburg doesn't just burn. Hamburg invents a new way to burn. A firestorm, Feuersturm. In German is a meteorological phenomenon created by mass combustion. Superheated air rises. Cold air is sucked in to fill the vacuum. Hurricane-force winds converge on the center of the inferno, traveling at 150 kilometers per hour, tearing people from the streets and sucking them into makeshift furnaces where asphalt melts and glass boils. 42,600 civilians died that night and in the 3 nights that followed. More than would die in the entire blitz on London. More than would die in any single air raid up to Hiroshima. And the aluminum foil, the rejected confetti, worked perfectly. The RAF post-mission report documents loss rate 1.5%. 12 aircraft out of 791. Before window, the expected rate would have been 40 aircraft, 28 crews saved, 280 men who would return to fly again, made of aluminum foil, due to physics, by strips of metal 27 centimeters wide falling from the sky like aluminum snow. But the cost of the electronic victory had not yet been fully accounted for, and what the Germans were about to discover would transform technical admiration into existential terror. July 29, 1943. Luftwaffe Headquarters, Berlin, Underground Conference Room. Reichsmarshal Hermann Göring throws the report on the table with enough force to make crystal glasses clink. His face, swollen with morphine and megalomania, is red with impotent fury. Aluminum foil! Aluminum foil! The British blinded us with chocolate wrapping paper! Around the table, generals and scientists remain silent. What can be said? The world's most sophisticated air defense, years of development, millions of Reichsmarks, the best scientific minds in Germany, has been dismantled by technology that cost pennies per kilogram. Dr. Hans Plendl, the physicist who developed the Knickerbein radio navigation system, speaks carefully. Mein Reichsmarschall. Technically, is ingenious. The simplicity is almost elegant. Each strip of aluminum is half a wavelength long for our Freya and Würzburg radar frequencies. Therefore, each strip becomes a perfect reflector. And when you have millions... I don't want a physics lesson, Goering explodes. I want solutions. Can we copy them? Yes, Plendl replies immediately. We've already started production. Codename Duppel. But... But what? But if we start using them, they'll simply change the frequencies of their radars. We change. They change. It's an electronic arms race that we may not have the industrial resources to win. Silence. The unspoken truth hangs over the table like a ghost. Germany is losing the production war. The British can produce millions of strips of aluminum foil. The Americans can produce billions. The German industrial machine, bombarded night and day, its workers starving and sabotaging equipment, is already failing to produce the basics: tanks, ammunition, fuel, and now, aluminum foil. But there is something deeper going on. Something that the German generals, trained in blitzkrieg doctrines and decisive battles, cannot fully comprehend. The war has changed, not in the trenches, not in the skies, but at a more fundamental level, in the very structure of perceived reality. Window was not just a technical countermeasure, it was philosophy transformed into a weapon. The first electronic war of denying reality. The Germans couldn't trust their sensors, they couldn't trust their instruments, they couldn't trust the difference between reality and illusion. In a radar bunker in the Netherlands, an operator describes the experience. It was like trying to count raindrops in a storm. The screen glowed with so many echoes that it merged into a solid mass of light. You knew some of those dots were real bombers carrying tons of bombs, but which ones? All of them? None? You guided fighter jets to targets that disappeared. You ignored targets that were real. You went mad trying to separate ghosts from demons. And the British didn't stop. Night after night. Window falling like metallic snow on Essen, Cologne, Nuremberg, Munich, Stuttgart, Frankfurt. Every night, millions of strips. Every night, the German air defense fighting ghosts while real bombers passed by with impunity. August 1943. Peenemünde, the V-2 Missile Development Center in the Baltic Sea. The RAF mounts an attack with 600 bombers. Window renders the defense useless. The research center is devastated. The V-2 program is delayed for months. September 1943, Berlin. The first time the Reich's capital is attacked with Window. Hitler watches from the bunker as the sky lights up with anti-aircraft explosions firing at phantom targets. Real bombers drop explosives on the armaments factories in Spandau. October 1943, Leipzig, Kassel, Hanover. Each week, German cities transformed into ovens as aluminum foil creates curtains of electronic invisibility. And something more subtle is happening. The RAF's loss rate continues to fall. 1.5%, 1.2%. On some missions, below 1%. The mathematical curve of death is inverting. Now you can complete not 20, but 50, 100 missions. Crews gain experience. Veteran pilots develop intuition, technique, and composure under fire. The RAF is not just surviving, it's evolving. It is becoming a strategic bomber force capable of operating night after night, in any weather, against any defense, with acceptable losses, all because of aluminum foil. The initial failure, the weapon forbidden out of fear, had transformed into the tool that would break the backbone of German air defenses and allow for the systematic destruction of Nazi warfighting capabilities. Winter of 1943-1944. The sky over Germany. Oberleutnant Heinrich Baer, ace of night hunting with 63 victories, chases ghosts over Berlin. His Messerschmitt Bf 110 cuts through the darkness at 500 kilometers per hour. The Liechtenstein BC radar on the bow, antennas extended like insect whiskers, drips echoes onto the small screen between his knees. But tonight, like every night since July, the screen is too full. Thousands of echoes, an electronic storm. He chooses a target. He accelerates. The distance closes. 1,000 meters, 800, 600. At any moment, he should see the unmistakable profile of a Lancaster bomber, 20 meters wingspan, 4 Merlin engines, vulnerable as a paper balloon when attacked from the lower rear. 500 meters, 300, nothing, only darkness and clouds of aluminum foil strips swirling in the turbulence of their passage, capturing moonlight, shimmering like metallic fireflies. He utters a curse and turns abruptly, forcing 5 Gs that push his body back into the seat, blood draining from his brain. He chooses another echo. He accelerates again. The war has changed, and it's losing, not for lack of courage, not for lack of skill, but because reality has become a lie. The numbers tell the story with brutal mathematical precision. Before, window, kill rate. 5 enemy bombers for every 100 German raids. After, window, kill rate, 1 bomber per 100 raids. German air defenses have not only diminished, they have collapsed to a fifth of their effectiveness. And the British, noticing the bleeding, tighten their grip on the throat. Operation after operation, night after night. November 7th, 1943, Dusseldorf. 800 bombers. Window turns German radar into dead television screens. Just static snow. The city burns for 3 days. November 18th, Berlin. First of 16 major raids on the capital. 4,000 tons of bombs. Window falls like silver rain. Anti-aircraft batteries fire 40,000 projectiles. They hit clouds of aluminum foil. The bombers pass unscathed. December 20th, Frankfurt. December 23rd, Berlin again. December 29th, Leipzig. There is no pause. There is no rest. There is no night when the German sky does not light up with explosions and the earth does not tremble with impacts. And window evolves. British scientists don't rest. Window, mark the first simple strips. Window, mark the 2, cross-shaped strips reflecting multiple polarizations. Window, mark third, strips coated with iron oxide reflecting lower frequencies. Window, mark 4, long strips simulating large bombers. Window, mark 5, short strips simulating fighter jets. The RAF learns to orchestrate ghosts. A bomber force drops, window on Hamburg, while the real force attacks Stuttgart, 200 kilometers to the south. The Germans send all their fighters to Hamburg. They find only echoes. Stuttgart burns unopposed, or two forces, both launching Window, approach Berlin from the north and south. The Germans divide fighter planes. Both forces are real. Both bomb. There is no adequate defense. German war diaries begin to document not only losses, but despair. Flakkorps. 3rd Berlin Air Defense report of January 2, 1944. Impossibility of precise fire direction. Batteries fire in saturation. Ammunition consumption 380% above planned. Hit rate. Impossible to determine due to the impossibility of visual target confirmation. Recommendation: none. There is no known effective countermeasure. And there's something darker lurking between the lines of the reports. Mental fatigue. Radar operators suffering nervous breakdowns. Not from fear of bombs, soldiers can face physical death, but from the dissolution of reality. From the feeling of being deceived, night after night, by an invisible force that transforms scientific instruments into liars. An operator from Würzburg writes in an intercepted letter, "It's like going mad slowly. You see the echoes. You know they're bombers. You fly the fighter. It finds nothing. You see more echoes. You fly again. Nothing. And then you hear on the radio that Cologne is burning, and you didn't see the real attack. They passed you by like ghosts." March 1944. The strategic turning point. The Luftwaffe lost control of the night skies over Germany itself. The statistics are unequivocal. German aircraft production, declining. Aviation fuel production, bombed to 30% of capacity. Veteran pilots, dead or exhausted. Replacements, teenagers with 20 hours of training. And the RAF, growing. 3,000 operational bombers, experienced crews, new bombers like the Lancaster Mark III with extended range. And tons, literally tons, of aluminum foil cut into 27-centimeter strips. Albert Speer, Hitler's Minister of Armaments, admits in a secret memorandum dated March 11, 1944, the continuation of nighttime air strikes at the current intensity will make it impossible to maintain war production at necessary levels. The enemy countermeasure known as Window has nullified our radar defenses. Without effective radar defense, we cannot stop the attacks. Unless a technical solution is found, a production collapse is inevitable within 6 to 9 months. The technical solution never arrives, because there is no technical solution to basic physics. You can't invent a radar frequency that aluminum foil can't reflect. You can't create a sensor that perfectly distinguishes a real echo from a fake echo when the echoes are physically identical. The only downside to Window would be stopping the use of radar. And without radar, night fighters are blind. Anti-aircraft batteries fire randomly. Air defense reverts to the level of the First World War, spotlights, and hope. The Germans are trapped, caught between technical impossibility and strategic disaster, and the bombers keep coming, night after night, protected by electronic fogging of aluminum foil, pouring fire on industrial Germany. What began as insignificant confetti had transformed into the most effective invisibility cloak ever created, not through magic, but through a cold, brutal understanding of how to make physics itself fight on your side. April 1944. Cambridge University. Secret lecture by Dr. R.V. Jones, head of British Scientific Intelligence. The room is full of intelligence officers, scientists, and strategic planners. Jones, thin, round spectacles, looking more like a math professor than a warrior, puts a slide in the projector. It's a strip of aluminum foil, 27 centimeters long, 2 centimeters wide. It glows in the projector light like liquid silver. "Gentlemen," Jones begins in a calm voice that forces absolute silence, "what you are seeing is not just metal, it's philosophy." He pauses for effect. "For 4 years, we fought a war against an enemy who believed in willpower. Willenskraft. Willpower. The Nazi doctrine states that determination overcomes materialism, that spirit conquers machine, that the Aryan will conquer the inferior resources of degenerate races." Another slide. Photographs of Hamburg burning. They were wrong. Jones walks to the front of the room, holding a strip of aluminum foil. This strip of metal, produced for pennies in ordinary factories by ordinary workers using ordinary aluminum, has defeated years of German scientific development. Not because we are smarter, but because we understand something fundamental that they don't. Reality doesn't bend to ideology. He places the strip on the table with an almost reverent delicacy. Radar works because electromagnetic waves reflect off conductive surfaces. This is not an opinion. It's not a theory you can dismiss because it doesn't fit your worldview. It's physics. And if you understand physics better than your enemy, you win. Not sometimes. Always. Inevitably. Mathematically. The officers take notes. Jones continues. "The Germans built an air defense system based on radar because radar works, but they failed to anticipate that the same physical principle that makes radar useful also makes it vulnerable. They thought in terms of systems. We think in terms of principles." A general raises his hand. "But surely, Dr. Jones, the Germans have brilliant scientists. Heisenberg, von Braun." "They do," Jones interrupts. "But science under tyranny is not free science." It is science in fear. German scientists cannot question ideological premises. They cannot collaborate freely. They cannot fail publicly without fatal consequences. And innovation requires failure. It requires trial and error. It requires the freedom to be wrong. He points to the strip of aluminum foil. Window was proposed in 1942. It was blocked by political fear until 1943. But when it was released, it was because scientific minds were able to argue freely with military leadership. Churchill questioned. Portal argued. Scientists presented data, and the decision was made based on evidence, not dogma. Jones changes the slide. RAF loss rate charts, a dramatic downward curve beginning in July 1943. This is what intellectual freedom produces. Not just individual victories, but systems of thought that generate continuous victories. The Germans can copy window, and they are copying it. But they cannot copy the process that created window. They cannot copy a society where radar operators can report problems without fear, where scientists can propose radical solutions without political purges, where failure is learning, not betrayal. He walks to the back of the room, leaving the gleaming metal strip beneath the projector. This war will not be decided by who has the most tanks or the most planes. It will be decided by who adapts the fastest, and adaptation requires truth. It requires looking reality in the eye and adjusting based on what you see, not what you want to see. Silence. Then a strategic planning officer says, "Dr. Jones, are you saying that window isn't just a weapon? It's a proof of concept for our entire approach to warfare?" Jones smiles slightly. "Exactly. And not just war. Consider this. The Germans invented radar. They invented jet fighters. They invented ballistic missiles. They have brilliant scientists and exceptional engineering. But they are losing. Why?" He doesn't expect an answer. Because technical competence without structural soundness is insufficient. You can build the fastest fighter jet in the world, but if you don't have the fuel to fly it because your refineries are being bombed by aircraft you can't detect due to aluminum foil, you lose. You can have the best pilots in the world, but if they're hunting ghosts while real bombers are destroying their factories, you lose. You can have the most rigid ideology in the world, but physics doesn't care about ideology. Radar waves reflect off aluminum. That's non-negotiable. It's not a matter of will. It's a fact of the universe. Jones turns off the projector. The room goes dark. Gentlemen, what you have witnessed over the past 9 months is not just a successful bombing campaign. It is empirical evidence that societies that value truth over dogma, evidence over ideology, adaptation over rigidity, prevail. Window cost millions of pounds to produce. It saved thousands of lives. It destroyed German cities. But its real value is deeper. It proved that reality is our most reliable ally, and our enemy is fighting against reality. He turns the lights back on. And nobody wins this fight. June 1944. Supreme Allied Headquarters, Southwick House, Portsmouth. General Dwight Eisenhower studies the intelligence reports with the concentration of a man who understands that each decision could kill thousands. Operation Overlord. The Normandy invasion, the largest amphibious landing in history. 150,000 men crossing the English Channel to land on fortified beaches against defenders expecting exactly that attack. Surprise is impossible. The Germans know an invasion is coming. The question is, where? Calais, the shortest distance across the Channel. Logical, expected. Or Normandy, further away, but with better beaches. The Germans have 50 divisions in France. If they concentrate in the right place, they can push the Allies back into the sea. D-Day could become the greatest military disaster in history, unless... On Eisenhower's desk is a classified report with a single word in red. Fortitude. Operation Fortitude. The most elaborate deception campaign in the history of warfare. Phantom armies, generals commanding divisions that don't exist, inflatable tanks, wooden airplanes, fake radio traffic, double agents feeding disinformation. Window. RAF has a plan. Code. Operation Taxable. On the eve of D-Day, while the actual invasion fleet sails for Normandy, 16 small boats will sail in circles off Calais. In coordinated flights above them, Lancaster aircraft will fly in precise patterns, launching window at mathematically calculated intervals. The result? German radar screens will show a huge fleet, hundreds of ships, advancing towards Calais at 10 knots. A perfect invasion. Coordinated, inevitable. completely false. Just metal falling from the sky in patterns that mimic radar echoes from a real fleet. Physics as theater, reality as deception. Eisenhower signs the operating order. June 6, 1944. 3:14 a.m. French coast near Calais. Oberleutnant Weber, the same officer who detected the first echoes of Window in December 1943, is back at his radar station. He has learned to distrust his instruments, but tonight, the screen shows a fleet, hundreds of ships, advancing slowly, consistently, exactly as a real invading force would move. He reports immediately. Alarms sound. The 15th Armada, 18 divisions concentrated in Calais, is placed on high alert. Coastal guns turn toward the sea. Minefields are laid. Infantry rushes into position, and they wait, and they wait. The fleet on the radar is approaching, 5 kilometers from the coast. 4, 3. Spotlights sweep across the sea. Empty, just waves, just darkness. Window. Floating on the surface of the water like the remains of a silvery shipwreck. And 200 kilometers to the southwest, in Normandy, the real invasion begins. 150,000 men, 7,000 ships. 13,000 aircraft. By the time the Germans realize it, it's too late. The 15th Army is in the wrong place. The Panzer divisions are being held in reserve, waiting for a second invasion of Calais that will never come. Hitler, convinced by radar reports and false intelligence, refuses to authorize the movement of reserves. The beachhead is established. The war has turned because of aluminum foil. General Günther von Kluge, commander of German forces in the West, writes in a personal report to Hitler on June 15th. Mein Führer, we are not merely fighting against armies. We are fighting against a form of warfare that we cannot fully comprehend. The enemy not only conceals his true forces, he creates false forces so convincing that we must respond to them as if they were real. And in responding to phantoms, we leave the realities vulnerable. Our detection systems, radar, aerial reconnaissance, intelligence, have been transformed into vectors of enemy deception. We cannot trust what we see. We cannot trust what our instruments tell us. And an army that cannot trust its own senses is a blind army. The memo never receives a reply. Hitler is beyond reason, living in a world of phantom counterattacks and miraculous weapons that never arrive. And the Allied machine advances. Not just with tanks and soldiers, but with the most devastating weapon of all, the ability to make the enemy doubt their own reality. What Window taught wasn't just how to blind radar. It was something deeper and more terrifying, that in an age of technological warfare, truth becomes a weapon, perception becomes the battlefield, and he who controls what the enemy believes to be real controls the fate of the war. May 8th, 1945. Berlin in ruins. The same radar stations that once protected the Reich are now silent, some destroyed by bombing, others abandoned when the fuel ran out, when the electricity failed, when the operators deserted or died. Oberleutnant. Klaus Weber walks through the ruins of the radar station near Berlin. The transmission tower is down. The control room is a burnt-out skeleton. He finds pieces of equipment, broken cathode ray tubes, burnt wires, melted control panels. And on the ground, among the rubble, partially buried in ash, strips of aluminum foil, millions of them, piled up like winter snow that never melts, layers upon layers, years of window, falling from the sky onto Germany, now just trash in a dead nation. He picks up a strip, 27 centimeters long, 2 centimeters wide, so light it almost flies from his fingers, and he starts laughing, a bitter, exhausted laugh, tasting of ashes. They were blinded, not by superweapons, not by death rays or atomic bombs or alien technology, but by aluminum foil, by first-year college physics, by strips of metal that any child could cut with kitchen scissors. The irony is so perfect that it hurts more than hunger, more than defeat, more than the certainty that everything, all the deaths, all the destruction, all the years of war, was for nothing. He remembers the first night, December 1943. When he saw 1,000 echoes on the screen and knew that something impossible was happening, when he reported it and was reprimanded for being nervous. What they didn't understand then, what he didn't understand, was that that moment marked the end, not immediately, not obviously, but inevitably. Because if your enemy can blind you with pennies of material wealth, what does that say about the fundamental disparity in resources, intelligence, and adaptability? If your enemy can weaponize basic physics while you waste resources on retaliatory weapons and racial ideology, you've already lost. The war did not end in May 1945. It ended in July 1943, when the first strips of window fell on Hamburg. Everything after that was just the universe doing its inevitable math. Weber releases the aluminum strip. It spins in the wind among the ruins, catches the light of the setting sun, shines for a moment like a shooting star. Akai. Setembro de 1945. Royal Aircraft Establishment, Farnborough. Dr. Joan Struthers is at her laboratory bench, the same one where she cut the first experimental strips of window in 1942. There is a final report in front of her. Classification. Secret. Title. Window. Strategic Effectiveness Analysis. 1943, 1945. The statistics tell a story that still leaves her astonished. Total number of window comic strips produced? 2.3 billion. Total weight, 23,000 tons of aluminum foil. Production cost, 2.5 million. Bomber crews saved. Conservative estimate, 4,500 men. Successful missions enabled. More than 10,000. Cost in damages inflicted on Germany. Incalculable. She does the mental calculation. 2.5 million pounds to save 4,500 lives. Approximately 555 pounds per life. How much does it cost to train a bomber pilot? 10,000 pounds. How much does it cost to build a Lancaster? 45,000 pounds. Window. Not only saved lives, it was the most efficient investment of the entire war. But numbers don't capture everything. They fail to capture the strategic transformation. How Window enabled a sustained bombing offensive that destroyed German industry. How it allowed the deceptions that made D-Day possible. How it forced the Germans to waste resources on futile countermeasures. They don't capture the psychological dimension. Radar operators going mad, fighter pilots chasing ghosts until their tanks are empty. The slow dissolution of trust in instruments, in sensors, in reality. and they don't grasp the philosophical lesson. Struthers writes in the conclusion of the report, Window demonstrated that in modern warfare, technical advantage does not belong to those with the most advanced technology, but to those who understand fundamental principles most deeply. The Germans had excellent radar, but they didn't understand radar as well as we do. This war was won not only in factories and battlefields, but in classrooms and laboratories. It was won by scientists who understood electromagnetic waves. By engineers who understood mass production, by gliders who understood that simplicity can be more effective than complexity. And it was defeated because our society allows scientists to speak truth to power without fear of consequences. It allows engineers to fail and learn. It allows radar operators to report honest problems without being executed as saboteurs. Window is aluminum foil, but it's also freedom transformed into physics. She closes the report and puts it in the filing drawer labeled War History. Decades from now, historians will study the great battles, Kursk, Normandy, the Bulge. But perhaps they will miss the real turning point. The moment when simple physics, applied intelligently, broke the backbone of the German defense. The moment aluminum foil changed history. Epilogue, Berlin, 1946. Interrogation of General Major Josef Kamhuber. British intelligence officer. General, when did you realize you had lost the air war? Kamhuber, the architect of the defensive line that bore his name, remained silent for a long time. Finally, the first night of Window, July 1943, I was in the control center in Deelen. I saw the screens explode in 1,000 echoes. I heard the controllers shouting, confused. I heard the fighter pilots reporting that they couldn't find targets. And I heard, on long-range radio, that Hamburg was burning. At that moment, I knew. Not that we had lost the entire war, that would still take 2 years, but that we had lost the skies. And once you lose the skies over your own territory, everything else is just a matter of time. What you did was, it was brilliant in its simplicity. You didn't attack us with more powerful weapons. You blinded us with cheaper materials. You turned our technology against us. And there was no defense. Not really. He pauses. You know what's maddening? We had aluminum foil. We had radar. We had all the elements. But we never thought about it. Or we thought about it and didn't implement it because of bureaucracy. Or we implemented it too late to make a difference. You thought first. You thought better. And crucially, you acted when it was necessary to act. That's the difference between victory and defeat. They laughed when they saw her for the first time. British scientists cutting aluminum foil like children on a school project. Skeptical officers loading bundles of confetti onto bombers that were supposed to carry explosives. Germans intercepting initial samples and dismissing them, a cheap trick by a desperate enemy. They stopped laughing when they realized that the sound of their laughter was now mixed with the thunder of defeat. Hamburg burning, Berlin in ruins, the Kamhuber line broken. German radar, the most advanced in the world, turned into an enemy by first-year university physics students. Fighter jets chasing ghosts while real bombers flew by. Cities transformed into ovens. The Nazi industrial machine suffocating under tons of explosives dropped by aircraft invisible to electronic sensors. And what blinded them? No death rays, no atomic bombs, no science fiction superweapons, aluminum foil. "27 centimeters of ordinary metal, cut by ordinary workers in ordinary factories, poured from the sky like silver snow upon a nation that believed that willpower overcame physics, that ideology conquered reality, that the Germanic spirit transcended material limitations. The irony is perfect. Arrogance was punished not by superior force, but by superior understanding. Not by more advanced technology, but by more basic principles applied more intelligently. The thunder spoke. Not with the voice of gods or destiny, but with the voice of inexorable physics, of indifferent mathematics, of a reality that does not negotiate with ideologues or dictators. Electromagnetic waves reflect off conductive surfaces. This isn't a German or British law, it's a law of the universe. And the universe doesn't bow to swastikas or speeches or thousand-year Reich promises. And heaven never belonged to them again. Not since that first night in July 1943, when millions of strips of aluminum foil fell upon Hamburg like avenging angels made of cheap metal and expensive intelligence. Not since physics became a weapon and reality became an ally. From that moment on, heaven belonged to those who understood that truth is non-negotiable, that reality is the final arbiter, that you can lie to people, but you can't lie to radar waves. And sometimes, the most devastating weapon isn't the one that makes the most noise. It's the one that makes your enemy realize too late that they were fighting against the entire universe. And nobody wins this fight. It doesn't matter how many divisions you have, how many tanks, how many soldiers are willing to die for a crazy ideology. If you don't understand physics, you lose. If you can't adapt, you lose. If you value dogma over evidence, ideology over reality, will over mathematics, you've already lost. The rest is just the universe doing its calculations, and the numbers never lie.